The millionaire flew abroad, leaving his pregnant wife behind. But the servant he trusted most was hiding a secret that would destroy everything. Welcome back, my amazing family and friends. If you're ready to dive into this unforgettable story, hit that subscribe button and drop a comment telling me where you're watching from. Tomorrow, I'll bring you another incredible tale you absolutely can't miss. Let's get started. And don't forget to like and share to help our community grow. The crystal chandelier caught the afternoon light, scattering rainbows across the marble foyer of the Ashford estate, a sprawling Georgian mansion perched on 5 acres in Greenwich, Connecticut. Victoria Ashford stood at the base of the grand staircase, one hand resting on the polished banister, the other cradling the 7-month swell of her belly. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, she watched storm clouds gather over Long Island Sound, dark and brooding as her thoughts. "Mrs. Ashford, your tea." The voice came from behind her, soft, measured, almost apologetic. She turned to find Thomas standing in the doorway to the sitting room, silver tray balanced perfectly in his hands. He was perhaps 40, maybe younger. It was hard to tell. His face had that quality of deliberate blankness that good servants cultivated, a studied neutrality that made him nearly invisible despite his solid frame and the hint of something sharp in his grey eyes. "Thank you, Thomas." Victoria took the cup, jasmine tea with honey, exactly as she preferred. In the 3 years since her husband had hired him, Thomas had never once gotten an order wrong, never once overstepped, never once given her reason to question his presence in their home. He was simply there. Like the furniture. Like the paintings her husband's interior designer had selected without consulting her. Thomas nodded and retreated, his footsteps silent on the Persian rugs. Victoria carried her tea to the window seat, settling carefully among the cushions. The baby kicked, a flutter, then a stronger thrust against her ribs. She smiled despite the loneliness that had become her constant companion. 6 weeks until her due date. 6 weeks until she'd hold her daughter. 6 weeks that suddenly felt like an eternity. Her phone buzzed. A text from her husband. "Landing in Tokyo in 4 hours. Meeting starts first thing tomorrow. Love you both." No apology. No acknowledgement that he was leaving her alone, heavily pregnant, to chase another deal in another country. Just the facts, delivered with the same efficiency he brought to board meetings and merger negotiations. Victoria's fingers hovered over the keyboard. She wanted to type "stay," wanted to type "I need you here," wanted to type "what if something happens?" Instead, she wrote, "Safe travels. We'll be fine." The lie tasted bitter. Upstairs, in the small room off the kitchen that served as his quarters, Thomas stood before the mirror, studying his reflection with the intensity of a man memorizing a stranger's face. He'd worn this identity for 3 years, the quiet servant, the invisible help, the man who poured wine and cleared plates while Greenwich's elite discussed their stock portfolios and vacation homes. 3 years of watching. 3 years of waiting. 3 years of protecting a woman who had no idea she needed protection. He opened the narrow drawer of his nightstand, pushing aside the servants' whites and black ties to reveal what lay beneath. A cell phone that wasn't registered to Thomas Burke, because Thomas Burke didn't exist. A photograph, edges worn from handling, of a young woman with Victoria's smile. And a file, thin but damning, containing evidence of a threat that even now was circling closer. His real phone vibrated. A text from a number with no name attached. His boarded. 12 hours until wheels up back to the States. You have a window. Thomas, though that wasn't his name, had never been his name, typed back, "I'm ready." But was he? When Victoria discovered the truth, would she understand? Or would she see only the deception, the lies of omission that had filled 3 years? He slipped the phone back into the drawer, buried the photograph beneath his clothing, and descended the back stairs to the kitchen. There was dinner to prepare. A role to maintain. A woman and her unborn child to keep safe, even if that meant keeping secrets that could destroy the fragile trust between them. By 7 o'clock, the storm had arrived in earnest. Rain lashed the windows, and wind howled through the eaves of the Ashford mansion. Victoria sat alone at the dining room table, 20 feet of polished mahogany that could seat 16, while Thomas served her meal, herb-crusted salmon, roasted vegetables, a small spinach salad. "Will you need anything else tonight, Mrs. Ashford?" he asked, his tone professionally neutral. She looked up at him, really looked, perhaps for the first time in months. There were shadows under his eyes, a tightness around his mouth that suggested sleepless nights. When had she last asked him how he was? When had she last seen him as anything other than a function of the household? "Thomas," she said slowly. Do you have family? Something flickered across his face. Surprise, perhaps, or pain, before the neutral mask returned. No, no one at all. Not anymore. The words hung in the air between them, weighted with unspoken history. Victoria felt a pang of guilt. This man had served her faithfully for 3 years, and she knew nothing about him beyond his competence and discretion. I'm sorry, she said quietly. Don't be. He cleared his throat. Will there be anything else? She shook her head, dismissing him, and he disappeared into the kitchen. But something in that brief exchange lingered, a thread of connection that made the mansion feel slightly less empty. Victoria picked at her salmon, no longer hungry. Outside, the storm raged. Inside, the house creaked and settled, its vast rooms echoing with absence. She thought of her husband, flying west across the Pacific, chasing deals and dollars while she sat here, swollen and alone, waiting for a baby neither of them had truly planned for. She thought of Thomas, alone in his small room, carrying sorrows he wouldn't name. She thought of the life growing inside her, innocent and trusting, depending on her for everything. And she had no idea that before the sun rose again, all of their carefully constructed worlds would shatter, and the secrets hidden in the shadows would finally, terribly, come to light. The contraction woke her at 2:47 a.m. Victoria's eyes snapped open in the darkness, her hand instinctively moving to her belly. The pain radiated from her lower back, wrapping around her abdomen like an iron band squeezing tight. She breathed through it, counting seconds until it released its grip. Too early. 6 weeks too early. She reached for her phone on the nightstand, squinting at the bright screen. No messages from her husband. He'd be in meetings now, on the other side of the world, unreachable. She pulled up her doctor's number, then hesitated. Maybe it was nothing. Braxton Hicks contractions. False labor. The baby shifting position. 20 minutes later, when the second contraction hit, she knew. Victoria threw back the covers and swung her legs over the side of the bed, moving slowly, carefully. She needed to get to the hospital. She needed. The lights in the hallway flickered, then died. The entire mansion plunged into darkness so complete it felt solid, oppressive. The storm had knocked out the power. Of course it had. Because tonight, of all nights, when she was alone and frightened and possibly going into premature labor, nothing could be simple. Thomas. Her voice cracked on his name. Thomas. She heard footsteps on the stairs, quick, purposeful, not the measured pace of a servant. The beam of a flashlight cut through the darkness, and then Thomas was in her doorway, fully dressed despite the hour, as if he'd been waiting for disaster. Mrs. Ashford, what's wrong? I think. Another contraction seized her, stealing her breath. She gripped the edge of the mattress, riding the wave of pain. When she could speak again, her voice came out small and frightened. I think the baby's coming. Thomas didn't hesitate. He crossed the room in 3 strides, his professional distance evaporating. How far apart are the contractions? 20 minutes. Maybe less. We need to get you to the hospital. Now. He pulled his phone from his pocket, dialed 911, listened, then cursed softly. Lines are down. The storm. What? Panic rose in Victoria's throat. What do we do? I'll drive you. Greenwich Hospital is 15 minutes away. He was already moving, grabbing her robe from the chair, her slippers from beside the bed. Can you walk? I think so. She gasped as another contraction hit, much sooner than the last. Thomas, something's wrong. They're getting closer too fast. She saw something shift in his expression, a crack in that careful neutrality. Fear. He was afraid, which meant she should be terrified. Listen to me, he said, his voice steady despite the fear in his eyes. I've got you. I won't let anything happen to you or your baby. Do you understand? Victoria nodded, clinging to the certainty in his words. He helped her to her feet, supporting her weight as another contraction bent her double. They made it to the hallway, then the stairs. Rain hammered against the windows, and somewhere in the house, something crashed, a shutter torn loose, maybe, or a tree branch through glass. Halfway down the grand staircase, Victoria's water broke. Oh God. She felt the warm rush of fluid, saw Thomas's flashlight illuminate the puddle spreading on the marble step. Oh God, Thomas, I can't. Yes, you can. His arm tightened around her waist. 5 more steps. Just 5 more. They made it to the foyer before her legs gave out. Thomas caught her, lowering her gently to the floor, his back against the wall, cradling her against his chest. Another contraction, brutal and relentless, and Victoria heard herself scream. "We're not going to make it to the hospital, are we?" she gasped when she could speak. Thomas's jaw tightened. "I need to check. I need to see how dilated." "You? You're not a doctor, you're a—" She stopped, staring up at him in the darkness. His face, usually so carefully blank, was raw with emotion she couldn't name. "Who are you?" "Someone trying to keep you alive." Before she could process those words, he was moving, gentle but efficient, checking her dilation. His hands were steady, professional, and Victoria realized with shock that he knew exactly what he was doing. 8 centimeters, he said quietly. "This baby's coming fast. Too fast." "I don't understand." Tears streamed down her face, pain, fear, confusion all tangled together. "How do you know how to?" "Because I'm not really a servant, Victoria." Her name on his lips, not Mrs. Ashford, felt like another revelation. "My name is James. James Morrison. I'm a former combat medic, and I've been in this house for 3 years for one reason only, to protect you." The world tilted. "Protect me? From what?" Another contraction cut off his answer. Victoria screamed, bearing down with an instinct older than thought. James's hands guided her, his voice calm and commanding. "Not yet. Don't push yet. Breathe. Victoria, look at me. Breathe." She focused on his face, on grey eyes that held secrets and sorrows and something that looked almost like anguish. "Why?" she managed between gasps. "Why would I need protection? My husband." "Your husband hired me to watch you. To keep you safe from a threat he never told you about." James's hands moved with practiced precision, supporting the baby's crowning head. "But there's more. Things I should have told you months ago. Things about your husband, about who's really after you, about—" "I don't care." Victoria's voice rose to a shriek. "I don't care about any of it. Just save my baby." "I will." The promise in his voice was absolute. "On my life, I will." The baby came with the next contraction, a rush of fluid and blood and miracle. James caught her daughter with sure hands, clearing her airway, and then the most beautiful sound Victoria had ever heard filled the foyer, a baby's first cry. "She's perfect," James said, his voice thick. "You have a perfect daughter." He laid the infant on Victoria's chest, skin to skin, and Victoria's hands trembled as she touched her child for the first time. 10 tiny fingers. 10 tiny toes. A shock of dark hair, matted and wet. Eyes squeezed shut against the brightness of the flashlight. "Hello, baby girl," Victoria whispered, sobbing. "Hello, my miracle." James worked quickly, tying off and cutting the cord with supplies he pulled from, where? A bag she hadn't noticed him carrying. He wrapped the baby in his shirt, then found blankets, pillows, making Victoria and her daughter as comfortable as possible on the cold marble floor. The storm raged outside. The power stayed off. And in the darkness of the foyer, as Victoria held her newborn daughter, she looked up at the man she'd thought she knew. "James Morrison," she said slowly. "Tell me the truth. All of it. Who sent you? What threat? And why would my husband hide something like this from me?" James met her eyes, and in his face, she saw the weight of 3 years of secrets. "Because," he said quietly, "the person who wants you dead is someone you trust. Someone close. And your husband suspected, but he didn't know who. So he hired me to be his eyes and ears. To watch everyone who came near you." Victoria's blood turned to ice. "And? Did you find them?" James's expression went hard. "Yes. 2 weeks ago, I confirmed their identity." "Who?" The word came out barely a whisper. "James, who wants me dead." He opened his mouth to answer, but before he could speak, the front door crashed open. Both of them froze. Someone stood silhouetted in the doorway, rain pouring in behind them, their face hidden in shadow. Lightning flashed, illuminating features Victoria knew as well as her own. Her husband's business partner. His best friend since college. The man who'd been best man at their wedding, who'd celebrated when they announced the pregnancy, who'd been a fixture in their lives for a decade. Richard Hendricks stepped into the foyer, and in his hand was a gun. "Well," Richard said, his cultured voice cold as winter. "Isn't this cozy?" James moved faster than Victoria thought possible. One moment he was kneeling beside her. The next, he was on his feet, positioning himself between her and Richard, his body a human shield. "Stay behind me," he said, his voice low and lethal, nothing like the soft-spoken servant she'd known. "Don't move." Richard's laugh echoed through the foyer, sharp and brittle. "Always the hero, aren't you, Morrison? I have to admit, I didn't see you coming. 3 years you've been right under my nose, playing the perfect servant." He raised the gun, pointing it at James's chest. "Impressive cover. Really. But it ends tonight." "It doesn't have to," James said, hands raised, palms out. "The police know everything. I sent them files 2 days ago, all your communications with the Castellano family, the insurance policies you took out on Victoria without her knowledge, the offshore accounts. You're done, Richard. The question is whether you walk away from this alive." Victoria clutched her baby tighter, her mind reeling. Insurance policies? The Castellanos, weren't they the crime family that had dominated Connecticut's underworld for decades? None of this made sense. Richard was her husband's best friend. He'd been at their engagement party. He'd held her hand at her father's funeral. "You're lying." But Richard's voice wavered. "You have nothing." "I have everything." James's tone was granite. "Including proof that you approached the Castellanos 6 months ago with an offer. Eliminate Victoria and make it look like an accident, and you'd split the $20 million life insurance payout with them. 50-50. Simple math for simple greed. 20 million. Victoria gasped. "I didn't know." "Your husband took out the policy after you got pregnant." James's eyes never left Richard. Standard practice for wealthy families. Richard had access to all of David's financial records as his business partner. He saw an opportunity. Richard's face twisted. "You think David's so innocent? He doesn't love her. He married her for optics, the successful white businessman with his beautiful black wife. Great PR for the company. Makes him look progressive, enlightened." His voice dripped venom. "But he doesn't see her. Doesn't appreciate what he has. Leaves her alone in this mausoleum while he jets around the world making his billions. So, you decided to kill her." James's voice was ice. "That's your solution." "I decided to set her free." Richard's gun hand steadied. "And get paid for it. Everyone wins. Except Victoria dies, you psychopath." "Details." Richard shrugged. "Besides, it was supposed to look like a tragic accident. A fall down these stairs, maybe. Carbon monoxide leak while she slept. The Castellanos are professionals. No one would have questioned it." His eyes glittered in the flashlight beam. "But then you sent those files, didn't you? Forced my hand. Now it has to be messier. Home invasion during the storm. Robbers broke in, killed the servant trying to protect her. Very tragic. Very believable." Victoria felt the baby squirm against her chest, making small mewing sounds. Her daughter. Her hours-old daughter, who might never see her first birthday if Richard pulled that trigger. "Please," she heard herself say. "Richard, please. You don't want to do this. Don't I?" He looked past James to her, and something flickered in his eyes. Regret, maybe, or the ghost of the friend he'd once pretended to be. "I'm sorry, Victoria. Truly. You were always kind to me. But I'm in too deep now. The Castellanos don't accept refunds. If I don't deliver, they come for me instead. And I've grown rather attached to breathing." "Then run," James said. "Take what you can and disappear. I'll give you a 10-minute head start before I call the police." "With what phone? The lines are down, remember." Richard smiled. "And even if you had one, even if you called them right now, they're not coming. The storm's knocked out half the roads in Greenwich. Trees down everywhere. They're busy with real emergencies." His smile widened. "We're alone out here. Just us and the thunder." Lightning cracked outside, as if to punctuate his words. "You're wrong about one thing," James said quietly. "We're not alone." Richard frowned. What? The gunshot came from behind him. Richard staggered, his face registering shock, then pain. His gun clattered to the marble floor as he grabbed his shoulder, blood seeping between his fingers. He spun around, and Victoria saw who stood in the doorway, rain-soaked and trembling, holding a smoking pistol. David Ashford lowered his gun, his face ashen. Get away from my wife. David. Victoria's voice broke. You're supposed to be in Tokyo. I never went. Her husband stepped into the foyer, kicking Richard's gun away. His eyes found hers, found the baby in her arms, and something in his expression crumbled. I couldn't. Not when James told me Richard was making his move. You knew. Fresh tears burned Victoria's eyes. You knew Richard wanted to kill me, and you left anyway? You let me think. I never left. David moved toward her, then stopped when James shifted, blocking his path. James called me at the airport. Told me Richard had contacted the Castellanos, that everything was accelerating. We set a trap. Made it look like I'd boarded the plane, but I stayed. I've been in a hotel in Stamford for the past 12 hours, waiting for James's signal. But the text? Fake. James's voice was tight. I sent it from a spoofed number. We needed Richard to think David was really gone. That Victoria was completely vulnerable. You used me as bait. Victoria's voice rose. You used your pregnant wife as bait to catch a killer. No. David's face twisted. God. No. James was here. Armed. Trained. I would never have risked you if. But you did. She was shaking now, fury and fear and betrayal all crashing together. You risked me. You risked our baby. You made me think I was alone when I went into labor, when I was terrified. I'm sorry. David's voice broke. Victoria, I'm so sorry. But if we'd told you, if you'd known, Richard would have seen it. He watches you. Studies your face. He would have known something was wrong, and he would have disappeared. We had one chance to catch him with his guard down. On the floor, Richard groaned, clutching his shoulder. You bastard. You shot me. You were going to kill my wife and child. David's voice went flat. Dangerous. I should have aimed for your head. James pulled out his phone, not the servant's phone Victoria had seen, but the other one, the real one, and dialed. Lines are back up. Calling 911 now. He rattled off their address, requested police and an ambulance, gave a terse summary of the situation. When he hung up, he looked at Victoria. They're 5 minutes out. 5 minutes. Victoria stared at the three men, the husband who'd lied to her, the friend who'd tried to kill her, the servant who'd been something else entirely. Her daughter whimpered, rooting against her chest, hungry and innocent and unaware that she'd been born into the middle of a nightmare. I want the truth, Victoria said, her voice steady despite the trembling in her limbs. All of it. No more lies. No more secrets. Starting now. David and James exchanged glances. Tell her, David said quietly. Everything. James nodded. He moved back to Victoria, crouching beside her, keeping one eye on Richard. 6 months ago, David noticed discrepancies in the company finances. Small amounts at first, then larger. He suspected Richard was embezzling, maybe working with outside parties. He hired me, a private security consultant, to investigate. Why not just fire him? Victoria asked. Why the elaborate charade? Because Richard's family owns 40% of our company, David said. We founded it together. I couldn't just accuse him without proof, or he could sue, tank the business, destroy everything we'd built. I needed evidence. Hard evidence. So, James came in as a servant, Victoria said slowly, understanding dawning. Someone beneath notice. Someone who could watch and listen without raising suspicion. Exactly. James's grey eyes held hers. I expected to find evidence of fraud. Maybe money laundering. Instead, I found something worse. Emails to the Castellano family. Discussions about eliminating you. At first, I thought he was just talking, fantasy, frustration, nothing actionable. But then he met with them. 3 times. And the last time, money changed hands. A down payment. Victoria felt ice in her veins. How much? 2 million. James's jaw tightened. They were professionals. They were going to make it clean. But then David and I started closing in. Richard knew we were investigating. He got sloppy, desperate. Tonight, with David supposedly gone and the storm providing cover, he decided to do it himself rather than wait for the Costillanos. And you just... Victoria looked at her husband. You just let all of this play out? Let me sit here, pregnant and alone, while a killer circled. I was never far. David's voice cracked. James had panic buttons installed in every room. Cameras everywhere. I was watching from the hotel, ready to come in seconds if anything went wrong. And James was armed, always. He would have died before he let Richard touch you. Victoria looked at James, at the man who'd served her tea and cooked her meals and protected her from shadows she hadn't known existed. Is that true? Yes. The word was simple, absolute. I was hired to protect you. But somewhere along the way. He paused, something raw and honest crossing his face. It became more than a job. You deserved better than this. Better than being kept in the dark. Better than a husband who's never home and a friend who wanted you dead. I'm sorry we used you this way. But I would have taken a bullet before I let him hurt you. Sirens wailed in the distance, growing closer. Richard laughed, a wet, pained sound. Touching. Really. The bodyguard falls for the client. Classic. He looked at David. You realize she'll never forgive you, right? You've destroyed your marriage to save it. Congratulations. Shut up, David said, but there was no heat in it. He looked at Victoria, and in his eyes, she saw the truth. He knew Richard was right. What would you have done in Victoria's position? Trusted the protection of strangers, or demanded the truth from the start? Drop your thoughts below. The police arrived in a chaos of flashing lights and shouted commands. Paramedics rushed in, one team for Richard, one for Victoria and the baby. They tried to separate her from her daughter, but Victoria held on tight, refusing to let go. We need to check the baby, a young paramedic insisted. Make sure she's healthy after such a traumatic birth. Then check her in my arms. Victoria's voice was steel. She's not leaving me. They relented. The baby was perfect, small but healthy, her heartbeat strong, her lungs clearly functioning given the volume of her cries. They checked Victoria next, confirmed she'd need stitches but nothing life-threatening, praised James for his competent delivery. You saved her life, one of the paramedics told him. Both of them. If you tried to drive in this storm, with labor progressing that fast. He shook his head. You did good. James said nothing. Just watched as they loaded Victoria onto a gurney. I want to go with her, David said. She's my wife. That's my daughter. No. Victoria's voice cut through the chaos. Everyone stopped. She looked at her husband, this man she'd married 3 years ago, this stranger who'd built their life on secrets and surveillance. James comes with me. You can follow in your car. David's face went white. Victoria. You made your choices. Her voice was calm, almost eerily so. You chose to lie. To manipulate. To treat me like a chess piece in your game with Richard. Those were your choices. Now I'm making mine. James stays with me and my daughter. You can visit at the hospital. After I decide if I ever want to see you again. The silence was deafening. Finally, David nodded. Okay. I understand. He looked at James. Keep them safe. Always, James said quietly. They loaded Victoria into the ambulance. James climbed in beside her, and the doors closed, shutting out David, Richard, the mansion, the whole twisted web of lies and violence. As the ambulance pulled away, Victoria looked down at her daughter's face, perfect and innocent and utterly dependent on her for everything. I'm going to name her Grace, she said softly. Because by the grace of God, we survived this night. James smiled. The first genuine smile she'd seen from him. It's a beautiful name. James. She looked up at him. Thank you. For protecting us. For delivering her. For everything. You don't need to thank me. Yes, I do. Her hand found his, squeezed. You were the only one who was honest with me tonight. Even if you couldn't tell me everything, you were honest when it counted. You told me the truth when I needed it most. Something flickered in his eyes. Gratitude, maybe, or relief. What will you do about David? Victoria was quiet for a long moment, watching the streetlights blur past through the ambulance windows. I don't know, she admitted. My husband. The father of my child. But he lied to me. Used me. Made me think I was alone when I was surrounded by people watching my every move. She blinked back tears. How do you forgive something like that? I don't know if you can, James said honestly. But I know you're strong enough to survive it. You're strong enough to survive anything. The baby, Grace, yawned, a tiny perfecto of a mouth, and settled against Victoria's chest. We'll see, Victoria whispered. We'll see. The hospital room was quiet, sterile, nothing like the chaos of the mansion. Victoria lay in the adjustable bed, Grace sleeping in the clear bassinet beside her, swaddled in hospital blankets patterned with tiny bears. Through the window, dawn was breaking, pale pink and gold bleeding across a sky scrubbed clean by the storm. James sat in the chair by the door, still wearing his blood-stained shirt, his eyes never leaving the hallway. A guardian. A sentinel. Even now, even here, he was protecting them. You should go home, Victoria said softly. Get some rest. Change your clothes. I'm fine. James. I'm not leaving. His voice was gentle but immovable. Not until I know you're safe. Richard's in custody, but the Costillanos are still out there. They paid for a service they didn't receive. They might want their money back. Or they might want to finish the job. A chill ran down Victoria's spine. You think they'd come here? To a hospital? I think desperate people do desperate things. James's grey eyes met hers. And I think I'd rather be paranoid and wrong than relaxed and dead. She couldn't argue with that logic. The door opened, and Victoria tensed, but it was only a nurse, a kind-faced woman in her 50s who smiled warmly as she checked the monitors, adjusted the foredrip. How are we feeling, Mama? She asked. Tired. Sore. Confused. Victoria managed a weak smile. But alive. That's what counts. The nurse glanced at Grace. She's beautiful. Have you tried nursing yet? Once. She latched right away. Good girl. Both of you. The nurse made notes on her tablet. The doctor will be by in an hour to check your stitches. You lost some blood, but nothing critical. You're a tough lady. Tough. Victoria almost laughed. She didn't feel tough. She felt shattered, like a vase glued back together, the cracks still visible no matter how careful the repair. After the nurse left, silence settled again. James stared at the door. Victoria stared at her daughter. And outside, the world kept turning, indifferent to the wreckage of the Ashford family. He's here, James said quietly. David. He's been in the waiting room all night. He wants to see you. Victoria's hands clenched the blanket. I don't want to see him. I know. But he's not leaving. And eventually, you'll have to talk to him. James paused. You'll have to decide. Decide what? Whether your marriage survives this. The words hung in the air, heavy and inevitable. Victoria looked down at her wedding ring, platinum, embedded with diamonds, a symbol of promises that now felt hollow. He lied to me, she whispered. For months. Let me think I was safe when I wasn't. Let me go into labor alone, thinking he was on the other side of the world. What kind of husband does that? One who's desperate. James's voice was measured, careful. One who's terrified of losing you but doesn't know how to protect you without controlling you. David's not a bad man, Victoria. He's just broken in ways he doesn't know how to fix. You're defending him. I'm giving you context. James leaned forward, elbows on his knees. I've watched him for 3 years. Watched how he looks at your photo when he thinks no one's seeing. How he calls you twice a day even when he's in meetings that cost thousands of dollars a minute. How he keeps a list on his phone of things you mention wanting, so he remembers for birthdays and anniversaries. He paused. He loves you. He just doesn't know how to show it in ways that don't feel like control. Victoria's throat tightened. Did he ask you to say this? No. He doesn't even know I'm talking to you about this. James's expression softened. I'm saying it because you deserve the whole truth. Not just the parts that are easy or convenient. David made terrible choices. But his motives weren't malicious. He was trying to protect you the only way he knew how, with money, with surveillance, with secrets. It's not right. It's not healthy. But it's not unforgivable either. How would you know? The words came out sharper than she intended. Have you ever been married? Ever had someone lie to you like this? James was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was rough with old pain. I was married. 8 years ago. Her name was Ava. Victoria blinked, surprised. What happened? I was overseas. Military contract, private security for a diplomat in Kabul. Ava stayed home in Virginia. She was pregnant, 7 months, just like you were. His jaw tightened. I got the call on a Tuesday. There'd been an accident. A drunk driver ran a red light. Ava and our unborn son died on impact. Oh God. Victoria's hand flew to her mouth. James, I'm so sorry. I flew home, buried them, and made myself a promise. Never again. Never get close enough to lose someone like that again. Never let someone depend on me when I couldn't guarantee their safety. He looked at her, and his eyes were haunted. That's why I took this job. Protecting people from a distance, where emotions don't get involved. Where I can do my job and walk away when it's done. But you didn't walk away, Victoria said softly. You're still here. I'm still here. A ghost of a smile crossed his face. Turns out, 3 years is long enough to remember what caring feels like. Long enough to forget why I was running from it. The confession hung between them, tender and dangerous. Victoria felt something shift in her chest, not attraction, exactly, but recognition. James understood loss in ways David never could. He understood vulnerability, the terror of loving someone you might lose. What would Ava want you to do? She asked. If she were here, what would she tell you? James's smile turned sad. She'd tell me to stop hiding. To stop punishing myself for surviving when she didn't. To let people in, even if it hurts. He met Victoria's eyes. And she'd tell you the same thing. Don't let fear and anger make you throw away something that might still be worth saving. Before Victoria could respond, the door opened again. David stood in the doorway, still wearing yesterday's clothes, his hair disheveled, his eyes red-rimmed. He looked at Victoria, at Grace, and something in his face broke. Can I come in? His voice was hoarse. Please. Victoria looked at James. He nodded once, then stood. I'll be right outside, James said. You need me, you call. He slipped past David and disappeared into the hallway, leaving them alone. David approached slowly, like she was a wild animal that might bolt. He stopped at the foot of the bed, his hands gripping the rail, and stared at his daughter with wonder and grief all mixed together. She's beautiful, he whispered. She looks like you. Her name is Grace. Victoria's voice was cool, distant. I named her while you were in the waiting room. I figured since you weren't there when she was born, I'd make the decision myself. The barb hit its mark. David flinched. Victoria, I know I don't deserve your forgiveness. I know I've broken your trust in ways I can't repair. But please, just listen. Let me explain. Explain what? How you turned our home into a surveillance state. How you hired a spy to watch me. How you used me as bait to catch your business partner without telling me my life was in danger. Her voice rose despite her effort to stay calm. What exactly are you going to explain, David? Because from where I'm sitting, it's pretty clear. I was terrified. The words burst out of him, raw and desperate. I was terrified of losing you. When I found out Richard was planning to kill you, I couldn't breathe. Couldn't sleep. All I could think was that I'd lose you like I lost my mother. Victoria went still. David never talked about his mother. I was 8 when she died, David continued, his voice breaking. My father was obsessed with his work, never home, just like everyone says I am now. My mother was lonely, depressed. One night, she took too many pills. The police called it an accident, but I knew she chose to leave. Tears streamed down his face. I swore I'd never be like my father. Never neglect my family. Never lose someone I loved because I wasn't paying attention. So, you paid too much attention, Victoria said quietly. You monitored and controlled and manipulated because you were afraid of becoming your father. But David, you became him anyway. Just in a different way. He nodded, anguished. I know. I see it now. I tried so hard to be different, to be present, to protect you from everything. But I did it wrong. I smothered you with money and security instead of giving you what you actually needed: honesty, partnership, trust. He looked at Grace, his expression crumbling. I missed her birth because of my own cowardice. I wasn't there when you needed me most. What kind of father does that make me? I don't know, Victoria said honestly. What kind of father will you be from now on? David's head snapped up. You mean, you're giving me a chance? I'm giving you a question. Victoria's voice was steady, though tears burned her eyes. You can't undo what you did. You can't give me back those hours of terror, thinking I was alone. You can't erase the betrayal. But you can answer one question honestly, and maybe, we can start to rebuild. Anything. David moved to her side, dropping to his knees beside the bed. Ask me anything. Victoria looked at him, this man she'd married, this stranger she'd thought she knew. If it happens again, if I'm in danger, if our family is threatened, will you tell me the truth? Will you trust me to handle it? Or will you lie and manipulate and treat me like a child who needs protecting from reality? David was quiet for a long moment, and Victoria could see the war in his eyes. The instinct to protect warring with the need for honesty. Finally, he said, I'll tell you the truth. Even when it's hard. Even when I'm scared. I'll trust you to be my partner, not my responsibility. He took her hand, his grip gentle. But you have to promise me something too. What? Don't shut me out. Don't let what Richard did, what I did, make you build walls so high I can never climb them. Let me earn back your trust. Let me prove I can be the husband and father you both deserve. His voice dropped to a whisper. Please. Give me that chance. Victoria looked at their daughter, sleeping peacefully despite the wreckage surrounding her birth. Grace deserved a father. Deserved a family, intact and whole. But she also deserved a mother who was strong enough to demand better. We'll need counseling, Victoria said finally. Real therapy. Not just a few sessions. Months, maybe years. You'll have to learn how to communicate without controlling. How to protect without suffocating. Yes. David nodded eagerly. Whatever it takes. And no more secrets. About anything. I want access to all the finances, all the business dealings. I want to know if there are threats, if you're worried, if anything changes. Complete transparency. Done. And James stays. The word surprised her as much as they surprised David. Not as a servant. As head of security for our family. Because clearly, we need someone competent watching our backs, and he's proven he's willing to die for us. David's expression flickered, jealousy, maybe, or insecurity, but he nodded. If that's what you want. It is. Victoria squeezed his hand. I'm not saying I forgive you, David. I'm not saying we're okay. I'm saying I'm willing to try. For Grace. For the life we built together. But if you lie to me again, if you betray my trust one more time, I'm gone. Do you understand? I understand. David lifted her hand to his lips, kissed her knuckles. I love you, Victoria. I'll spend the rest of my life proving it. Grace chose that moment to wake, her small cry piercing the quiet. David looked at his daughter, his face transforming with wonder and fear. Can I hold her? He asked hesitantly. I know I don't deserve to, but... You're her father. Victoria's voice was soft. Of course you can hold her. She watched as David carefully lifted Grace from the bassinet, cradling her with a tenderness that made Victoria's chest ache. He was awkward, uncertain, but his love was unmistakable. Hi, baby girl, he whispered. I'm your daddy. I'm sorry I wasn't there when you were born. I'm sorry for a lot of things. But I promise you, I'm going to be better. I'm going to be the father you deserve. Grace stared up at him with unfocused eyes, and then, impossibly, perfectly, she smiled. Just gas, the rational part of Victoria's brain insisted. But it looked real. It looked like forgiveness. Victoria felt tears slip down her cheeks. Not tears of joy, exactly. Not tears of sorrow. Something in between, grief for what was broken, hope for what might be rebuilt. "We're going to make this work," she said, more to herself than to David. "Somehow, we're going to make this work." 3 months later. The autumn leaves were falling again, painting the grounds of the Ashford estate in shades of amber and crimson. Victoria stood at the nursery window, Grace nestled against her shoulder, watching as workers installed the final security camera near the gate. New measures. Visible measures. No more hidden surveillance. No more secrets. James stood in the driveway below, directing the installation team with practiced efficiency. He'd moved out of the servants' quarters and into the renovated guest house, a proper residence with its own entrance, its own space. He was no longer invisible, no longer pretending to be something he wasn't. Chief of Security for Ashford Industries, with a salary that reflected his expertise and a title that commanded respect. "He's good at his job," David said, coming up behind her. He wrapped his arms around her waist carefully, mindfully, always checking now that his touch was welcome before assuming. "I owe him everything." "We both do," Victoria agreed. Grace gurgled, waving a tiny fist at nothing in particular. She'd grown in 3 months, filled out, her features becoming more defined. She had David's nose, Victoria's eyes, and a temperament that suggested she'd inherited stubbornness from both sides of the family. "Dr. Martinez called," David said. "She has an opening this Thursday at 2. I moved my meetings." Thursday. Their couples therapy session. They'd been going twice a week since Victoria came home from the hospital. Painful, necessary sessions where they unpacked years of dysfunction, learned how to communicate, how to fight fairly, how to trust again. It was hard. Some days, Victoria wanted to quit, to pack Grace up and leave, to start over somewhere David's lies couldn't reach. But then she'd see him with their daughter, patient, present, learning how to change diapers and warm bottles and soothe midnight cries, and she'd remember why she was fighting for this marriage. "I'll be there," she said. David kissed her temple. "Thank you. For trying. For giving me this chance. Don't thank me yet. We have a long way to go." "I know." He paused. The prosecution called. "Richard's trial date is set for January. They want you to testify." Victoria's stomach clenched. She tried not to think about Richard, tried to push the memory of that night into a dark corner where it couldn't touch her new normal. But of course there'd be a trial. Of course she'd have to face him again. "Will you come with me?" she asked. "To the courthouse." "Every day. Every minute." David's arms tightened around her. "I'm not leaving your side." That evening, Victoria found James in the security office he'd set up in what used to be David's home gym. Multiple monitors displayed feeds from the new cameras. Front gate, driveway, all entrances, the nursery. Transparent security. Everything out in the open. "Got a minute?" she asked from the doorway. James looked up from his laptop, surprise flickering across his face. "Of course. Come in." She settled into the chair across from his desk, adjusting Grace in her arms. The baby was fighting sleep, fussy and overtired, but Victoria had learned that sometimes babies just needed to be held through the difficult moments. Wasn't that true for everyone? "I wanted to thank you," Victoria said. "Properly. For everything you've done. You've thanked me a dozen times. Then this is 13. She smiled. "You saved our lives, James. Mine and Grace's. And you did it knowing you might die in the process. That's not something you just say thank you for once and move on." James shifted uncomfortably. "I was doing my job." "No. You went beyond your job. Way beyond." Victoria held his gaze. "You told me about Ava. About your son. That wasn't part of the job description." "No," he admitted quietly. "That was personal." "I'm glad you told me." Victoria's voice softened. "It helped me understand. Not just you, but what David was feeling. The terror of losing someone. How it makes you do irrational things. Has it gotten better? Between you two?" Slowly. "Some days are good. Some days I want to throw my wedding ring in the sound and change the locks." She laughed, the sound tired but genuine. "But we're talking. Really talking. About his mother, about my father's death, about all the grief we've been carrying separately instead of together. Turns out, we were both so afraid of losing each other that we stopped actually being with each other. That's a painful realization. But a necessary one. Victoria looked down at Grace, who'd finally surrendered to sleep. I want her to grow up in a home where people tell the truth. Where love doesn't mean control. Where mistakes are acknowledged and forgiven. That's worth fighting for. It is, James agreed. She's lucky to have you as a mother. And you as a protector. Victoria met his eyes. I mean that. I want you in her life, James. Not just as an employee, but as family. Someone she can trust. Someone who'll tell her the truth when everyone else is afraid to. Something shifted in James's expression. Gratitude, emotion, the slow thawing of a heart that had been frozen for 8 years. I'd be honored. Good. Victoria stood, cradling Grace against her shoulder. Then you're coming to Thanksgiving dinner. No arguments. You're family now, which means you're stuck with us. James smiled, a real smile, warm and genuine. I suppose there are worse fates. On the Thanksgiving day, the dining room table was smaller this year, not the massive 20-foot monstrosity that could seat a board meeting, but the intimate cherrywood table from the breakfast nook, pulled into the dining room for the occasion. Just the 4 of them, David, Victoria, Grace and her bouncer, and James. No business partners. No society friends. No one who'd ever made Victoria feel like an accessory to David's success rather than a partner in their marriage. This is nice, David said, looking around at the simple decorations. Autumn leaves in mason jars, candles that smelled like cinnamon, none of the formal centerpieces his decorator usually insisted on. Really nice. Small is good sometimes, Victoria agreed. She'd cooked most of the meal herself, not because she had to, but because she wanted to. Roasted turkey, sweet potato casserole, green beans, cranberry sauce from scratch. Simple, homemade, filled with love. James helped her bring the dishes to the table, falling easily into the rhythm of partnership. Over the past 3 months, they developed an easy friendship, built on shared trauma, yes, but also on mutual respect and understanding. Should we say grace? David asked, then winced. Sorry. Pun not intended. Victoria laughed. Let's say grace for grace. They held hands around the table, David, Victoria, James forming a circle of protection around the baby sleeping peacefully in her bouncer. I'll start, David said. He squeezed Victoria's hand. I'm grateful for second chances. For a wife who's stronger than I ever gave her credit for. For a daughter who reminds me every day what actually matters. And for mistakes that, somehow, led us to something better. Victoria's turn. I'm grateful for survival. For truth, even when it hurts. For learning that strength isn't about doing everything alone, it's about knowing when to lean on people who care about you. She looked at James. Your turn. James was quiet for a moment, his eyes suspiciously bright. I'm grateful for family. For remembering what it feels like to belong somewhere. For the chance to protect people who've become more than a job. He paused. And I'm grateful that Ava's watching somewhere, knowing I finally stopped running. Amen, Victoria whispered. They ate, talking and laughing, sharing stories. David told them about the board meeting where he'd announced he was stepping back from day-to-day operations, promoting his COO to president so he could focus on being a father and husband. James shared memories of Ava, the first time he'd spoken her name aloud in years without it feeling like swallowing glass. Victoria talked about her plans to start a foundation, supporting pregnant women in crisis, giving them resources and protection she'd almost needed herself. Grace woke up halfway through dinner, demanding attention. David lifted her from the bouncer, cradling her with the ease of practice. Hey, princess, he murmured. We're just being thankful for you. Victoria watched her husband with their daughter, and felt something in her chest unknot. They weren't perfect. Their marriage still had cracks, still required constant tending like a garden that had almost died from neglect. But they were trying. And that counted for something. There's something I need to tell you both, James said, his tone careful. Victoria's stomach dropped. What? Is there another threat? The Castellanos. No. Nothing like that. James set down his fork. The Castellanos were arrested 2 weeks ago. FBI raid on their New York operations. They're done. You're safe. Relief flooded through Victoria. Then what? I've been offered a job. Head of security for a tech company in Silicon Valley. Significant pay increase. Equity stake. It's the kind of opportunity that doesn't come around often. He looked between them. I wanted you to hear it from me before I made my decision. Silence fell over the table. You should take it, David said finally, though Victoria heard the strain in his voice. It's a great opportunity. David, Victoria started. No, he's right. It is a great opportunity. James's smile was sad. But I'm turning it down. What? Victoria and David spoke in unison. You're turning it down. David repeated. Why? James looked at Grace, sleeping peacefully in David's arms. Because family isn't something you leave for a bigger paycheck. Because I spent 8 years running from connection, and I'm done running. Because... He met Victoria's eyes. Because you asked me to be here for Grace. And I don't break promises. Victoria felt tears prick her eyes. James, you don't have to sacrifice your career for us. It's not a sacrifice. It's a choice. His voice was firm. This is where I belong. This is where I'm supposed to be. I know that now. David cleared his throat, his own eyes suspiciously wet. Then we need to renegotiate your salary. And benefits. And give you a proper title. Director of Security Operations for all Ashford Holdings, not just the estate. David, you don't have to. Yes, I do. Your family. And family takes care of family. James nodded, emotion clear on his face. Thank you. Both of you. Grace chose that moment to spit up on David's shoulder. The moment of heavy emotion shattered into laughter as David scrambled for a burp cloth. Victoria rushed to help, and James grabbed the baby before disaster struck. Welcome to family life, Victoria said, grinning. It's messy and unpredictable and sometimes literally covered in baby vomit. But it's real. And it's worth it. 6 months later. Victoria stood outside the courthouse, Grace strapped to her chest in a baby carrier. Spring had arrived, tentative and hopeful, with cherry blossoms drifting like snow on the courthouse steps. David held her left hand. James stood on her right. A united front. You ready? David asked. No, Victoria admitted. But I'm doing it anyway. Inside, the courtroom was austere and intimidating, all dark wood and stern faces. Richard sat at the defense table, thinner than she remembered, his expensive suit hanging loose on his frame. When he saw her, something flickered in his eyes. Regret? Shame? It was hard to tell. The prosecutor led her through her testimony, the night of the storm, Richard's confession, the gun, the terror. Victoria spoke clearly, steadily, with Grace sleeping against her heart, a reminder of what she'd been fighting for. Mrs. Ashford, the defense attorney began during cross-examination, his tone oily and insinuating. Isn't it true that you and your husband were experiencing marital problems? That he was frequently absent? Yes, Victoria said simply. And isn't it possible that in your emotional state, alone, pregnant, frightened, you may have misinterpreted Mr. Hendrick's intentions? Victoria looked directly at Richard. I didn't misinterpret the gun pointed at my head. I didn't misinterpret his confession to hiring the Castellano family to kill me. I didn't misinterpret his plan to murder my newborn daughter and the man trying to protect us. Her voice was steel. I know exactly what Richard intended. And I know I'm only alive because he failed. The defense attorney had no response to that. The jury deliberated for 3 hours. When they returned, the verdict was unanimous on all counts: attempted murder, conspiracy to commit murder, solicitation of murder for hire. Richard was sentenced to 35 years in federal prison. As they led him away in handcuffs, he looked back at Victoria one last time. I'm sorry, he mouthed. She didn't acknowledge him. There was nothing left to say. 1 year later, Grace's first birthday party was everything Victoria had dreamed of: intimate, joyful, filled with people who genuinely loved them. The backyard was decorated with balloons and streamers in soft pastels. A small cake, homemade by Victoria, sat on the picnic table, a single candle ready to be lit. David's parents had flown in from Florida. Victoria's sister had driven up from Philadelphia with her kids. And James was there, of course, taking photos with the dedication of a proud uncle. "She's walking," someone shouted. Everyone turned to see Grace, who'd been cruising along the furniture for weeks, suddenly let go and take 3 wobbly steps toward Victoria before plopping down on her diapered bottom. The crowd erupted in applause. Victoria scooped her daughter up, laughing and crying at the same time. "Did you see that?" David rushed over, his face transformed with joy. "She walked. Our daughter walked." "She did," Victoria agreed, kissing Grace's chubby cheek. "She's growing up." "Too fast," David said, but he was smiling. They sang Happy Birthday, helped Grace blow out her candle, which mostly involved Grace trying to eat the frosting, and watched her tear into presents with the enthusiasm only a 1-year-old could muster. Later, as the sun set and the guests began to leave, Victoria found herself standing by the garden with James, watching David play with Grace on the lawn. "It's a good life," James said quietly. "It is," Victoria agreed. "Not perfect. But good. Sometimes good is better than perfect." James smiled. "Perfect is boring. Good is real." "When did you become a philosopher?" "When I stopped being so afraid of living." He looked at her. "Thank you for that. For reminding me that surviving isn't the same as being alive." Victoria linked her arm through his. "Thank you for saving us. For staying. For being exactly what we needed when we needed it most." "Always," James said. It was his promise, his oath, his purpose. David walked over, Grace on his shoulders, her tiny hands tangled in his hair. "Everything okay?" "Everything's perfect," Victoria said, then corrected herself. "Everything's good. Really, truly good." That night, after Grace was asleep in her crib and the house was quiet, Victoria and David sat on their bedroom balcony, watching the stars emerge over Long Island Sound. "Do you remember last year?" David asked. "The storm? Everything that happened?" "Every day," Victoria admitted. "Sometimes I still have nightmares." "Me too." David took her hand. "But I also have dreams. Good ones. About our future. About Grace growing up. About us growing old together. About everything we almost lost and somehow got to keep." "Do you think we're okay?" Victoria asked. "Really, okay?" David considered the question seriously. "I think we're better than okay. I think we're honest. And that's something we never were before, even when we thought we were happy." He kissed her knuckles. "I love you, Victoria. Not the version of you I wanted you to be, but the real you. The strong, stubborn, courageous woman who survived a nightmare and chose to forgive me anyway." "I love you too," Victoria said. And she meant it. Not the easy, uncomplicated love of their wedding day, but something harder one and more valuable. Love that had been tested and broken and rebuilt into something stronger than before. They sat in comfortable silence, listening to the night sounds, crickets chirping, waves lapping against the shore, the occasional cry from Grace's room that resolved itself before they could respond. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if James hadn't been here?" Victoria asked. "Every day. And every day, I'm grateful we'll never have to know." David pulled her closer. "He's a good man. A brother in every way that matters." "He is," Victoria agreed. Inside, she heard Grace stir, then settle. Her daughter. Her miracle. The child who'd been born in chaos and violence but would grow up in peace and truth and love. That was the victory, not that they'd survived, but that they'd used survival as a foundation to build something better. "Come on," David said, standing and pulling her up. "Let's go check on our girl." They stood in the nursery doorway, watching Grace sleep. She'd kicked off her blanket, her arms spread wide like she was embracing dreams only she could see. So vulnerable. So trusting. So utterly dependent on them to keep her safe and loved and honest. "We're going to get it right this time," Victoria whispered. "For her. We're going to build a family that's real, not just perfect on the outside." "We already are," David said. And looking at her daughter, at her husband, at the life they'd fought so hard to preserve, Victoria realized he was right. They already were. 5 years later, the elementary school auditorium was packed with parents holding cameras, waiting for the kindergarten spring concert to begin. Victoria sat between David and James, Grace's baby brother, 3-year-old Marcus, squirming on David's lap. When does Gracie come out? Marcus asked for the third time. Soon, buddy, David promised. Watch the curtain. The lights dimmed. The curtain opened. And there was Grace, front row, wearing a flower crown and a nervous smile. She spotted them in the audience, and her face transformed. Victoria waved. David waved. James waved. Even Marcus waved, suddenly interested now that he could see his sister. Grace sang with her classmates, slightly off-key, completely enthusiastic, utterly herself. And Victoria felt her heart swell with a love so fierce it almost hurt. This was what they'd fought for. This moment. This ordinary, extraordinary moment of watching their daughter sing about spring flowers in a school auditorium. After the concert, Grace ran to them, throwing herself into Victoria's arms. Did you see me? Did I do good? You were perfect, Victoria said, kissing her daughter's forehead. Not perfect, James corrected with a grin. But really, really good. Grace beamed. Good is better than perfect. That's what Mommy always says. Your mommy is a wise woman, David said, pulling Victoria close. They walked out to the parking lot together, their family, unconventional and hard-won and absolutely real. Grace chatted about the concert. Marcus begged to go for ice cream. David promised they would if everyone got in the car, and James took photos of all of it, documenting the beautiful chaos. Victoria looked back at the school, at the life they'd built, at the family they'd fought to preserve and remake. They'd survived a storm. Survived betrayal and violence and secrets that could have destroyed them. But survival was just the beginning. What came after, the forgiveness, the rebuilding, the choice to trust again, that was the real victory. And it was a victory they'd earned together. Victoria and David's journey remind us that the strongest relationships aren't the ones that never break, they're the ones that break and choose to heal. Grace was born in darkness but raised in light, not because her family was perfect, but because they were honest. What do you think makes a family truly unbreakable, perfection or the courage to be imperfect together? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And if this story moved you, let us know what moment resonated most. Your voice matters to us. Thank you for experiencing this journey with me. If this story touched your heart, please share it with someone who needs to hear it.